This was a really unique one. Vast majority of people that jumped on the bandwagon to do this were doing this because they saw that it was working really well in the space right now for the last year or two is how do I appear in ChatGPT and the other large language models? And it works. It has worked, right? It's worked extremely well. It's worked way better than I ever would have expected, especially on Google, because
on today's episode, I interviewed Lily Wei. She was named as one of the most influential SEO experts by USA Today. She currently is the VP of SEO Strategy and Research at Amsive and leads an award-winning team. Enjoy today's episode. Thanks for coming on. So, because you have formal education in politics, how did, and a musical background as well, politics degree from NYU, so a very, very good university as well. How did you find your way into SEO? Why was SEO enticing for you or the marketing industry? I'd love to know more about your journey.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's so basically I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. My father's a software engineer. He used to work at a company called Sun Microsystems, which was later acquired by Oracle. And so I literally grew up in like the heart and soul of like the burgeoning Silicon Valley tech industry. My dad used to commute to Silicon Valley every morning. And, so I grew up around a lot of like computers and my dad taught me, and my brother also learned, HTML and web design, web development when we were like 10 or I was 8, he was 12. So very much grew up in that environment. I eventually went to NYU and like you said, studied politics and Spanish, but was always very techy, was very interested in that at that time in like social media marketing and, adopting all these new apps and everything. Basically in 2008, we had the like economic recession in the United States, and it led to a big scarcity of jobs, including jobs in the political field. And I was doing some interning at the mayor's office and everything, but I actually stumbled upon an SEO job on Craigslist. I didn't even know what SEO was, but it was like SEO and social media marketing for a small startup. And I went and did the interview and they liked me. And then I just, got the job and started learning everything in-house, teaching myself a lot of stuff. So the next 2 years after that, I basically like worked in a couple different SEO positions, teaching myself everything until about 2 years in, I moved into the agency world. But yeah, it was just like a passion project and just something that kind of like fit my skills, I guess.
And it just stuck. So you went in actually more for social media marketing, but somehow remained.
Yeah, like I had a combination of already knowing like a little like HTML and CSS and just being very like computer savvy, I think compared to maybe other folks that were interviewing just because of how much time I had spent on computers growing up. And a lot of that was at that time, like the early social media apps. And honestly, SEO in the very beginning when I started, this wasn't the very beginning, but my very beginning, it was really like, I mean, it's funny, we've kind of come full circle, but it's like going on Dig and Reddit and stumble upon these sites and like building links, which for whatever reason that was, it worked really well at the time. But between that and like optimizing content and looking at analytics, I fell in love pretty fast. It's a really fun profession.
Amazing to hear. You said you've been in the industry for a while. From what I gather, you've been in the SEO world for like 15 years now. What parts of SEO? Yeah. And what parts of SEO have, stayed the same and what has changed? Black hat used to be, or gray hat, used to have more hacks way back when that didn't get penalized as much. And now you kind of see the hacks coming back. I'm curious to know how you see the industry change over the last decade. Are things still going back to how they were before, or like where are we in the cycle?
It's a great question. I think obviously everything's changed in terms of the landscape. Obviously, we have now AI platforms, how people are searching. Google's a million times more sophisticated. It used to just be 10 blue links. Now it's everything except 10 blue links. Like the landscape of searching has totally changed. But, the funny thing about the SEO and now what we call AEO industry is it's very cyclical. A lot of the same kind of like ebbs and flows of tactics work and then don't work, right? So, back in the day when I started, it was pre-Panda, pre-Penguin, and we started to see these really big catastrophic algorithm updates from Google to basically counter a lot of SEO spam and a lot of just general web spam. And we've seen that same cycle repeat itself many, many times throughout SEO history. But I would say right now, it's like a pendulum, right? So we have years where there's a lot of kind of like spammy tactics and hacks and exploits and loopholes that people find. And then they go around the world at SEO conferences and black hat conferences and everything, and they share them far and wide. And it becomes very, very popularized. And in the meantime, we have Google, and honestly, in this case, probably OpenAI is doing the same, where they're looking at countermeasures, right, to like demote those types of tactics, and then people move on to something else. So it's very cyclical in that way. I think 2025 into early 2026, we're definitely seeing a bit of a renaissance as far as hacks and loopholes, because I think moving into this LLM environment, they're not as sophisticated as combating spam as, say, Google. So it's an interesting space, because right now there's a lot of opportunity to basically take advantage of easy loopholes in AI search.
But those easy loopholes are also sort of short-lived, right? And I wanted to talk a bit about your article that's been doing rounds around LinkedIn. It's very well written data. And for those of you listening, Lily did some investigation and found that like Google is basically hunting down listicle articles. But the caveat is these are listicles made by the companies themselves on their blogs, where they're putting themselves on the top spot. So not necessarily blogs that are, listing down top 10 gadgets, unbiased. No one's really unbiased, but, at least it's a separate entity. And you were, critical on how, this is no longer self-serving and these guys are getting hit. I would say like hacks that are being, promoted all over LinkedIn, social media, through newsletters as well, and through SEO communities. And you said that they do have some short-lived benefits, but what advice would you give for SEOs, in-house SEOs especially, on what they should listen to, what should they take advantage of, and what they should be maybe skeptical about?
For sure. And this was a really unique one, because it was, number one, I would say the vast majority of people that jumped on the bandwagon to do this were doing this in some capacity because they saw that it was working really well in LLMs. And that's been where everyone's most excited about, right, in the space right now for the last year or two, is how do I appear in ChatGPT and the other large language models? And it works. It has worked, right? It's worked extremely well. It's worked way better than I ever would have expected, especially on Google, because Google has a very long history of targeting review manipulation. And so I've been quite surprised that it's lasted as long as it has. But the reality is it's worked very well. So I can't sit here and, pretend to say to SEOs, you shouldn't have done that the entire time, because I know a lot of companies made a lot of money, doing exactly that. So it's a tricky thing. That being said, my experience in the SEO space is when you dabble in tactics that end up getting demoted or penalized, you're playing with fire. We don't know how far Google's going to go when it decides to, demote or nullify or penalize those types of tactics. I've worked on many different companies that have been basically penalized or like removed from Google search effectively for doing similar things. So my perspective is always, let's not even play with fire in the first place. Let's try to find another way to, visibility and revenue and everything like that, because I like to play it safe. Now, there's a whole spectrum of opinions in the space. I think a lot of people are much more, risk tolerant and just want to see the results right away, especially a lot of people that are entering into this new kind of like AI hype world where they just want to see results really quickly. But I'm not surprised to see Google cracking down on it. I think sometimes it takes Google a time to get enough data, right? Because if they're using machine learning, for example, they need to train their models with enough examples, right? So I think that's what we're seeing now. And I think it's early days for Google cracking down. I don't think they're done yet. So I think, a lot of people are still saying, well, mine's still working, right? What I've found so far is the companies that are really kind of abusing the tactic. Companies that I found one yesterday that had 3,000 articles where they put themselves as the best product. That's obviously manipulation, right? It's like there's kind of this gray area. Like if you have one or two, maybe it's fine. If you have 3,000, that's a pattern that Google can spot. So my advice is, just be careful, because if you're in the interest of never, allowing your clients to get like dinged by an algorithm update in a really big way, then play it safe. Maybe don't dabble in those types of tactics. If you're really just trying to see results really quickly and you're okay if the site crashes in a year or two, maybe go for it. So I think it just depends on your level of risk tolerance.
I see. And you said that the kind of sites that you're seeing do this are the ones that are maybe less risk averse, very AI heavy, probably AI generated content, AI slop even. Yeah, hundreds of pages that are written to sort of take advantage of these hacks. Is there really a middle ground? Because it's either you're like super risk averse and you're afraid of, especially if you're doing in-house, and that's why I keep saying in-house SEO, the onus is on the SEOs to make the decision, as opposed to possibly working with an agency where you're still talking to other people in a department and can kind of make that decisions together and soundboard, and you can give this advice. How would you empower in-house SEO sort of navigating these scenarios on their own?
Like, number one, I tend to repeat myself here, but I think it's extremely important. And I think it's also kind of interesting how many people in this space don't consult Google's guidelines or documentation, right? Google has documentation for all of this. And I think a good SEO that's thinking long term will read the documentation and compare it against their tactic and make sure that they can answer yes to most of the questions that Google puts out there about writing good content. So if you're writing, this is literally review content, right? When you have a listicle and you're saying what are the best B2B software companies in whatever category, that's a review article, right? And Google has specific criteria for review websites and review content. In fact, sites that were primarily review content a few years back, many of them lost 90 to 100% of their visibility when Google rolled out the reviews update because they weren't meeting Google's criteria. So I think number one, read Google's criteria for helpful content, for writing good reviews. And then you can say, okay, we feel really confident that we're able to produce content that does check these boxes. We feel really good about our research methodology. We feel really good about conveying our expertise and why we should be trusted. We feel like we have a lot of evidence that we've actually tested all these different products. So we're excited to share this article. And maybe we do it on a really small scale. Maybe we start with 3, right? Or 5, and just kind of test that, see how that works. But just because something works on a small scale doesn't mean you then go use some AI automation tool to make 400 of them, right? I think that's where a lot of SEOs go wrong. So less is more right now, I would say, in 2026 for sure.
Being quite conservative with even positive experiments, not deploying anything yet, but just seeing how it plays out in a couple of months. I'm curious to know, because you mentioned that LLMs can be more susceptible to spammy tactics, right? In comparison to Google. Google does a very good job on cracking down with this with their core updates, and they've always had like a stronger regulation around on these slightly, black hat, gray hat tactics. But how do you expect, LLM platforms to kind of clamp down on these sort of tactics similar to Google in the future? Do you have any predictions on how this might look like
Yeah.
for OpenAI or Anthropic? Like how do you see them enforcing it?
Yeah. So a couple things. Number one, there's almost this like self-policing that happens because Google and Bing and presumably the other providers of search data. I know there's like, Exa is another one that I think ChatGPT uses. I believe they have their own. I mean, we know with Google and Bing, right? They have their own spam like systems, spam fighting systems, and quality, algorithms that look for site quality and also demote low quality content. So when large language models like ChatGPT are using web search, which is a lot of the searches that they're doing, they're already getting like a curated list of articles that have already been kind of refined or pages that have been refined by these spam filters and everything. So I think that's one aspect of it. But then when you look at the training data, I've been trying to learn a bit more about this over the last year or two. LLMs have their own mechanisms for, removing spam and poisoned data and everything from the training data. It's not perfect, but if you think about it, like they're pattern detection machines, so they can spot patterns, including LLM poisoning, right? Or spammy or manipulation, like spammy or manipulative tactics in the training data. So I think one thing I've read about is like if they identify that a site or a resource that they're using in their training data is full of spam or manipulation or prompt injection or whatever it is, they might not use that resource in future training data. That's something that scares me a lot, right? If you're like playing with fire and right now you're seeing really good success in LLMs, how do we know that the next model update, they're going to say, oh, we see this big pattern happening here and all the sites that are doing that are no longer included in the training data? That's like the kiss of death for AI search. So that's another reason why I'm like, we just don't know how they're going to respond to spam. But I think it's very naive to assume that they won't do anything.
That's very interesting to hear because like how is this growth sustainable, right? Or you could just be blacklisted.
Yeah.
and that's it. All your hard work completely gone. Could you share how you're implementing AI visibility, strategies for your clients at Amsive?
Yeah. Yeah. No, listen, I mean, I've said this a lot. I think it's really an extension of a lot of the work we were doing with SEO for a long time. There's just kind of like a new set of rules and also new data sources, new tools, right? We didn't have tools like Profound or Ahrefs Brand Radar or SEMrush AIO. Like these are new tools with new data, right? We're able to do prompt tracking. We're able to do visibility monitoring, across different LLMs, even though these tools have their flaws, like that much is 100% true. We have some new directional data about how our clients are doing in AI search. And with that data, we can respond in different ways, right? Maybe we identify that there's lots of topics where competitors are getting a lot of visibility in certain LLMs where we don't really have a lot of strong content on those topics. So it's about refining our content, improving our content, changing our language around it, or creating new content, right? And it's not just text content. It can be multimodal content. It can be video content. It can be, like we can recommend that the experts at their company do podcast interviews or whatever it is, right? It's just kind of like identifying those gaps and pivoting into those areas with more content. And then obviously there's the offsite aspect of it. I think, offsite marketing has become much more important with AI search. So we have a social media team at Amsive that we've always worked with, but I'd say we're working with much more closely now, right? They have tools to like monitor Reddit insights and monitor what people are saying across social media and really jump into those conversations on behalf of the brand. I think we're doing a bit more of that. And then there's the technical aspect as well. Number one, can these LLM, crawlers see our content, right? That's kind of a technical challenge. We already have a tech SEO team that has worked on crawling and rendering and indexing for a long time, but now they have to think about, what content's being served to those bots and can they see it? And then, we're moving into kind of a new space as well with like agentic commerce and the universal commerce protocol and building apps for OpenAI. Like it's kind of these like technical implications where we're bringing in our web team as well. So it's become much more cross-channel, I would say, at the agency, but it's SEO teams just learning new things and new data, new skills like we always have.
Nice. And there's a better collaboration across teams,
Yeah,
which is nice.
definitely. Yeah, I mean,
SEOs
like
don't need to sort of stand alone anymore, right? It's not an island.
like one cool example over the last year or so was like, we know that log files are extremely important for understanding how bots are visiting our site. And our web team really quickly spun up like a dashboard for all of us to just quickly check, how LLMs are parsing client data, from a log file perspective. So yeah, working cross channel has been extremely important the last year or two.
I wanted to talk about your take on these AI visibility tools, because do you think they're essentially sentiment analysis tools that have, been sort of like the stronghold for social media teams?
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite AI visibility tool? Would you like to maybe share some of the tools that you found useful, or your take on what's going on in that space?
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch, right? Because it's like, we're all sitting here doing our SEO thing for a long time, and suddenly there's like first 5 and then 10 and then 20 and now 100 of these new tools everywhere, right? And then not only that, people are spinning up their own with vibe coding and everything. So it's like
Exactly.
it's like
Yeah.
I've probably gotten like 100 messages in the last year from people that want me to try their tools, and we just can't use that many, right? We don't have enough time, but we have tested a lot of them, and I am actively working with a few of them. So our team formally works with Profound. We have for about almost a year, and I think it's a great tool. I think as far as like all these tracking tools go, it has a ton of data, a lot of insights that we can use for our clients, which has been really helpful as we do AEO, audits and consulting. But there's a lot of other great ones as well. I've used Peak AI a bit, which I really like as well. I think it's really easy to use, which I really like. There's another one called Wake. Doesn't get as much attention, but it's by Dixon Jones, and he's been in this space for a long time. He's the founder of Majestic and also a tool called InLinks. And what I love about Wake is it's much more affordable than the other tools by a huge, price differential. But it works extremely well, and it has actionable recommendations that I believe in. I actually think they're really great sustainable recommendations really, really quickly. It can spit those out really quickly, which I think is something where these tools are lacking in many cases. And I've demoed some others. I've used SEMrush AIO. I use Ahrefs Brand Radar. I use SimilarWeb. They're all really good as well. They're innovating really quickly. But then, I don't want to do a disservice to the other, let's say, 20 pretty popular LLM tracking tools. I haven't used all of them, and they all seem to be doing really cool things. So it'll be interesting to see where we land, within a year or two, like which tools are still around.
You're not
But
picking favorites yet.
I can't really say I have favorites. They all do different things. But, I will say there's a lot of, skepticism around the methodologies here that I share for sure. I think even the tools know that they're very limited in how they can collect and share this data. It's not 100% precise. And I do think that it's going to become increasingly challenging for these tools to provide accurate data over time, given personalization in LLMs. So it's very directional. It's the most directional data we've ever really worked with in the SEO space.
I see. I love that you shouted out Wake, or it stands for What AI Knows About Us. It's a tool that was recommended. I think you're now the third person on the show to have shouted them out. And I'm going to have Dixon, the CEO of
Amazing.
the tool, join. So it'll be really interesting to get his perspective as well. I think it's a brilliant tool. It's more
Yeah.
affordable for smaller companies to try and accessible. So it's really nice that it's in your mix. I wanted actually to talk a bit about your research methods when it comes to the research and analysis that you do. In your Substack post, you referenced using the Systrix Visibility Index, which is something I've not heard about in a while. We all know
Mhm.
about it in the SEO world, but no one really sort of uses it as much or doesn't talk about it as much. But I think it's quite a useful index to reference, to kind of reference the size impact. So I wanted to know, what other tools or data points do you trust when you are trying to avoid, misleading conclusions when you're
Yeah.
actually doing these analysis? Maybe you can talk me through it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they're all imperfect, right? Nothing's going to be as useful as getting Google Search Console access for all these companies and then really seeing the first party data. And even then, Search Console is super sampled. It's not perfect. It's not sharing all the data. So, like, everything in the SEO space is kind of like an imperfect science, unfortunately. So, I try to be very clear in my articles and my research which tools I'm using, right? So, like, if there's some type of data discrepancy, which there is all the time, that's honestly on the tools. I'm just sharing what they have, right? It's not going to be perfect. But that being said, I've used Systrix, Ahrefs, SimilarWeb, sometimes SEMrush, mostly those tools. And now, with AI Search Profound, I use a lot of their data as well. And again, it's not all perfect, but I do think it's very directional. And I also see in many cases, number one, the Systrix Visibility Index. Yes, it's not as well known, especially like in the US, in Germany and parts of Europe, it's much more popular. But basically, I see a really strong correlation between what the visibility index shows and what our client's visibility looks like. Sometimes it's a little bit of like a leading indicator. Like sometimes you'll see the visibility change in Systrix, and then a couple days later in search, you'll see, wow, it's kind of following that same pattern. But that, and also with Ahrefs, I think there's pretty close alignment, right? So it's not perfect, but it's tends to be pretty consistent with what we're seeing with our own client accounts. So that's why I feel good about using that data, just because I haven't seen too many examples where it's like wildly different from like a trend perspective. It can be very different from a estimated monthly traffic perspective, especially now with AI search, right? Because it's very hard for these tools to calculate the impact of AI overviews, for example, on click-through rates in AI mode, because we don't have that data broken out. But, we used to be able to do a much better job of predicting how much traffic a site is going to get from search. And now with AI overviews, it's completely like it's thrown a wrench into everything.
Impressions are probably the only way you can kind of
Yeah,
gauge
exactly.
something, but you can't ground it with the click-through rates anymore. I want to ask, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people make when they're trying to reverse engineer Google update or trying to make sense of a site getting hit? Because you're very open in saying that there are limitations to all these tools. And also it's sort of like the wild, wild west of like academic research right now in SEO, right? Everyone's
Yeah.
trying to find their way to sort of provide statistically sound results that can be generalized. What do you kind of see is the biggest red flag, something that people are using to research, to do their own research, but they're kind of going rogue and not something
I
new to
think a
follow?
lot of what I see, in my opinion at least, these are all my opinions, but it stems from a lack of seeing the bigger picture about how these things work, right? I've worked on Google's algorithm updates and penalties for a long time. And I've seen a lot of examples of sites that are impacted. And when you see a lot of those, because not everybody works on these types of sites, right? If you're working on like an e-commerce site, right, that's generally trying to like do things right, maybe not try too many manipulative things, you're probably not going to see like destruction from a core update, you know? But when you work on the sites that do, you see a lot of patterns, right? The types of companies that they are, the types of industries that they're in, and normally the types of SEO tactics that they're doing. So I think one thing that people make a mistake of doing is when they're trying to look at like an algorithm hit or something, is they're thinking with very granular examples of like, they have two H1s on the homepage. Oh, they have bad core web vitals on this page template. It's like very rarely explained by something that minor, right? When you're looking at impacts from a core update, usually you have to really zoom out and you say, what's going on with the site that is causing Google to not trust it across the board? And you really have to like take a look at the approach of like, how is this site making money? What are the incentives of this site? What are they doing with their content strategy? What are they doing with their link building strategy? What are they doing where if you imagine that you're Google and you can see literally everything, right? I think A lot of people don't give Google and Bing enough credit for like being able to see things extremely easily, right? Everyone's always like, do you think Google could really see that? Do you think they could really figure that out? I'm like, yeah,
It could
I
feed
think they could figure that
everything.
out 20 years ago. Yeah. So, what is the site doing that Google flagged, right? And when you understand their spam policies, their content policies, their manual actions, all of that, you can usually see it pretty easily. So I think that ability to zoom out and understand some of those more like indirect factors as opposed to like one concrete little SEO thing that might have caused the problem.
Understood. I love that you shouted out being in not just Google, but Bing as well as being very open with the data that they have. I think just yesterday, this is a bit of news for those of you listening. Bing just released their AI Webmaster tool, right, which has been
Mhm.
great. Have you managed to test it out? How are you feeling about citations being the metric? Do you have any thoughts on it that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think still early days. I've only played with it a little bit, but my team's digging in. We like the fan out queries in there. It's really cool. I think it's a bit limited. We're not getting like a ton of data from them, but listen, any data is good data when it comes from the source. That's been the biggest challenge in our space right now is that we're not getting AI specific data from Google. I would say that's the number one challenge for everybody in this industry right now. And the fact that Bing put anything out there is helpful because it might put a little pressure on Google to say we maybe need to provide some data as well. We'll see about that. It's not the first time that Bing has been more generous with the SEO community than Google has, but also we would love an open AI search console. Obviously now that they have ads, a lot of us are like, okay, maybe now we're going to get some data, but we haven't seen it yet. So
We're
I
still
think
waiting.
still waiting. So any data is better than no data. But, I do think that Microsoft, they can't tell us everything, right? I think there's a lot of concerns from these companies about really truly sharing the traffic impacts of AI search because they know it cuts into traffic. You know, they don't say that publicly, but we all know it's not a secret.
The numbers are going to be scary for
Yeah.
companies. On that note, I would love to move into our rapid fire round. So I have a list of questions where, to just get your hot take on them. So yeah, the first one is in relation to Bing's Webmaster release. Citations are the new rankings. Do you agree or disagree? And what's the nuance that you think people miss?
I don't think they're the new rankings. I think citations are another metric worth paying attention to, 100%. But rankings are still there. Search engines are still there. There's millions, if not billions, of people in the world who've never tried ChatGPT, but they're still using Google, right? They're still clicking on organic links. Yes, that's changing. It hasn't completely changed yet. And I do think rankings matter, right? Because how you're ranking, even in the context of AI search, it matters for whether or not you get pulled into the conversation. So I think you should still monitor rankings. I think you should also think about your citations.
And actually, I wanted to ask, how are you currently splitting your time for your clients when it comes to optimizing for AI and, optimizing for SEO, which is still very relevant, of course?
The thing is, a lot of the work that we're doing for SEO helps with AI search. When we help with JavaScript rendering issues on our tech SEO team, when we help with crawling and indexing problems, we're helping with AI search. The better that our clients can appear in search results, the more likely they are to be cited when a large language model uses web search, right? So I think in many cases it's the same thing, right? But for sure we're doing a lot more thinking around like how are we positioning this content or this brand or this conversation in a way that it will make a lot of sense for LLMs. We weren't really thinking about that before, but I would say we also have like a separate AEO service. So not all of our clients are engaged in that service, but obviously for the ones that are, we're much more focused on AI search. But again, I do think it all really goes together. I think, for example, the Amsive website, we've done a lot with SEO and making our site healthy in the search landscape. And we see that when we publish an article within 3 hours, you can find it in ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude and everything. So it's like, it really goes together from what we see.
And what are maybe the top three learnings that you have from experimenting with the Amsive site that you'd like to maybe share
Yeah, I mean, when
on
we
getting
put
that
out,
3 hour retrieval rate?
yeah, when we put out any type of new research or opinions or data that we share, again, I'm not even exaggerating. It gets indexed on Google in a couple hours usually because we share it on social media and it causes Google to pick it up. Google tends to like fresh content for a lot of these different topics that we're writing about. So if we're writing about the December core update, there's not that much information out there. We have a history of writing on that topic, so we tend to perform really well really quickly. And you search 2 hours after we publish about the December core update, you see it in AI overviews, or you see it in Google, And then you search in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is going to use Google or Bing or whatever it is, and they're going to find the article and they're going to cite it. So it all goes together. So I think what we're seeing is like publishing on a site that has good authority, right? It has a propensity to rank well in search, and publishing original and unique insights. You're going to see that content being cited pretty quickly. That's what we've seen so far.
And the social signals as well seem to be quite important, right? So
Yeah.
putting social
Yeah.
into your strategy, that's
I don't want to downplay that. I think I've seen, especially with my own like testing over the years, the more engagement I get or we get on a social post, the better it performs in search and AI search. It tends to be a really strong correlation there. If something goes kind of a bit viral, right? It gets indexed faster, right? It starts ranking faster. And, it looks like AI search LLMs, they like looking at what people are saying about things. They like looking at what people are saying on LinkedIn, what people are saying on Reddit, and comments in different places. So I think when something has a lot of buzz, it can really increase the likelihood of it being cited in AI search.
nice. Thanks for that little diversion from rapid fire, but I really wanted to get some more insights on this. What is maybe your most useful AI workflow that you've built in the last 6 months? Have you been vibe coding at all?
Yeah, a little bit. Let's see. It's pretty simple, but like an automation that sends me a daily recap of everything happening in the SEO space as much as it
Very
can.
useful.
Yeah, that's been really helpful. It's funny, it sends it at like midnight. So like right as I'm going to sleep, I'm like, oh great, like now I have more information to consume, but I should probably change that. But that's been helpful. I built some tools for Google Discover to help write titles in Discover. And I've been doing some work lately with Claude to actually speed up a lot of the analysis that I do around algorithm updates. That's been extremely helpful using like the Ahrefs MCP. I've been having a lot of success with that in Claude lately.
And what's your favorite LLM to use? Or do you use a different LLM for different tasks?
So funny. I would answer that question differently every few months.
But what's
I've
your
officially
current,
fallen
like,
out of
what's
Yeah, I've
the
officially
current?
fallen out of love with ChatGPT, I have to say. I think it's good
Okay.
for certain things, but I have a lot of trust issues with ChatGPT, let's say. I really like Gemini for day-to-day things. I think Google put out a much better product. It's much safer to use. It has better guardrails around when it can't answer something or when it's not safe for it to answer something, which I really appreciate, right? If you ask like a health or legal question, it's like, I am not a lawyer. I am not a doctor, right? Here's some general things to know, but it's not going to pretend to be your best friend and like give you all the answers, right? So I love Gemini, but I love Claude for like working and like vibe coding and stuff like that.
I I felt the same. I was team OpenAI. I mean, team ChatGPT in the very beginning because their interface just sold it, right? It was the
Right.
ease of use. But then once you get deeper into the work and also the ethical side of these LLM
Yep.
tools and AI in general, you're like, oh, I don't want to give too much data. But
Exactly.
then also once you start vibe coding or just playing around with workflows, because I attended Brittany Muller's course recently,
Cool.
um, and I fell in love with Claude. I'm like, wow, I've been missing out. So,
Yeah.
it's so much more helpful for coding, for also more technical tasks. But I still use OpenAI. I mean, I still use ChatGPT for writing because I feel like I have so much past data, that historical data and writing and tone of voice that,
Yep.
so, I'm locked in already, unfortunately.
It's good for creative stuff. I think ChatGPT is amazing for like kind of like fun, lighthearted, creative work, but I would not trust it with my information at this point.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But what's one SEO task that should be automated by default in every team?
Let's see. I mean, like, I think now a lot of the reporting, using the right MCPs and everything can be automated. A lot of the more like menial keyword research type stuff, I think, again, if you're using something like the Ahrefs MCP to do like competitive research can be really helpful. But yeah, I think we're a bit more cautious on our team because sometimes when you check the outputs of an AI automation, they're not 100% correct, right? Like even with MCPs, you can sometimes see the data is not perfect. And that's scary. We can't be in a position at an agency to just be like automating everything because if you're not really checking the accuracy, it can get you in a lot of trouble. So I think the team's experimenting with lots of different things. We have lots of people on the team that are building things for like, knowledge graph lookups and all these kind of things that used to be a bit more like manual. We have little tools for that now, but we haven't yet put too many things 100% on autopilot.
You still have a human in the loop.
Yeah, always.
Nice. What's the most or worst slash most overhyped AI SEO advice you keep seeing repeated?
Hmm. Mm. Well, a funny one is, with so many people talking about AI search, it's like everyone's convinced that that structured data is the best possible thing you can do for AI search, right? And I think, listen, structured data is important. You should use it. You should absolutely think about applying it to your sites. But I think it's funny how much people have, like, the number of posts that I've seen in the last year that are like, SEO's dead. Everything is moved to ChatGPT. So if your content is not ready, you're not going to be found. So here's what you need to do: implement structured data. I'm like, that's funny. That's cute, because we've been doing that for what, 15 years, right? So it's not overhyped in the sense that you shouldn't do it, but I think people are taking a lot of things out of context and trying to repackage existing tactics as if they're brand new.
I see. And it's just, I had a lot of technical SEO experts on the podcast, and they were basically saying this as well. They're like, yes, technical SEO is important, but it's not, going to exponentially improve your rankings, like, or your citations all of a sudden, because of what you said, the very reason, and how these existing hacks, I mean, not hacks, even existing best practices have existed, but people are just sensationalizing it. So
Yeah, I mean, also,
very nice.
like, even if you have the best tech SEO in the world, a lot of this stuff with AI search boils down to who's the best brand, right? There's only so much tech SEO you can do if you're not being recommended as the best brand in many different places online. And that's the harder part, I would say. So, like we said before, it's a very faceted multi-channel effort.
Do you have a preferred term for it, for the tactic of being everywhere? Yeah, I know there are different terms being used on it right now. And omni-channel, yes. But I mean, omni-channel marketing has existed, but there was another that it's
Search everywhere,
search
search
everywhere.
experience everywhere. Like, there's all kinds of new stuff that people are saying.
Yes.
I don't really have a word for it. I would call it cross-channel marketing, honestly. I think multimodal and cross-channel is usually what I say.
Initially, when I started the show, it was like, oh, what do you call AI search? Because it was the whole AO, GO debate. And now that's kind of settled, and everyone has their favorite. And also the clear distinction of like what GEO is. And now I feel like with this multimodal, multi-channel search, I thought that would be a new buzzword prediction. Sure. What's one of the strangest, most interesting thing you've used an LLM for?
Jeez. I mean, it's like, it's hard to answer these questions because I don't know about you, but at this point, I'm using them like all day, every day for everything, both work and personal. It's actually a fun one. I speak Spanish, and I'm going to be doing a conference presentation in a couple weeks in Spanish in Argentina. And I've studied abroad in Argentina. I've lived there for several months at a time, but I've never given a keynote presentation in Argentine Spanish before. And believe it or not, ChatGPT is incredible with practicing language. So what I do is, when I'm driving around or commuting around in New York, I tell it, like, let's practice Spanish, Argentine Spanish, in the voice mode. And you wouldn't believe how spot on the Spanish is, or at least I don't know about other languages, but like specifically Argentine Spanish. It knows all the slang. It has the accent down perfectly. And then you can tell it to correct you while you're speaking. So
Oh, wow.
I've found that to be the single most effective way to practice a language I've ever experienced before.
Wow. Like better than, was it Rosetta Stone way back when, or Duolingo now? Like, so this is because for that specific dialect as well, you're saying, right? The accent and
Yeah, it's not only that, it's the way that it talks to you. You feel like you're talking to a human. It responds so quickly. You literally feel like you're talking to a human. The difference is that if I were to sit there for an hour with an Argentine and talk to them, it would bore them to death. But ChatGPT doesn't get bored.
but you don't feel bad. You don't feel bad for using their time to perfect the
Exactly.
language, Nice.
Yeah.
I love that. What's one favorite tool you didn't expect to love?
I think lately, Claude. Yeah. I mean, I always kind of liked it, but I think lately it's really proving, I'm sure you can feel the same thing. It's really proving to be super effective. I have the new Chrome extension where it like takes over your browser and starts to do things for you. It's unbelievable. The funny thing about it now is remembering that I can do stuff with AI. I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's like doing something really menial that I've been doing for a long time, being like, wait, I can automate this. Why am I not automating this? I think that's the most exciting part right now, is learning how many of the little things you do are now possible with AI.
I think it's because there was maybe an overwhelming feeling in the beginning, right? Because everything came out at once.
Yep.
And you felt like you had to try a different LLM, try to compare, especially working in the industry of SEO. It's also the job to know, how these different tools work. And there was also, I think, maybe a bit of an LLM fatigue. But now as we're getting back to regular programming and realizing that, you can sort of find slower ways to integrate it without it, without it being all fresh and new. And also I love the community of people sharing.
For sure. Oh, yeah, that's amazing. So many people sharing so many cool tools every day. Another one I
And
forgot
their
to mention
workflows,
is
yeah.
Notebook LM is another one I forgot to mention. It's been absolutely invaluable for a lot of the work that we're doing, like putting a lot of client data into Notebook LM. I mean, not necessarily client data, but data about the company, right? Branding guidelines, some like keyword performance or whatever it is, and really understand having like a place that you can go, repository of information to then do things like keyword research and content ideation and stuff like that has been really cool in Notebook LM.
And do you also use it for your research? So to help you sort of refine your findings?
Yeah, definitely. I think setting up like one space or repository for all that content and then just having a place to go where it's going to really limit hallucinations from what I've seen. And then another thing I like to use it for is I go to a lot of conferences and speak at a lot of conferences. And so what I do is I take rapid fire notes and then I kind of incorporate those notes with pictures from the conference and maybe some videos if they have videos. And then I use Notebook LM to like talk to talk to it about what happened at the conference and then use that to write some articles as well.
And that's proprietary data as well that you're making, right?
It's really helpful to have it all in one place. Like I've done that in the last couple of articles I've written that are like summaries of conferences I've attended. I put all my notes into there and it helps you write a summary.
Nice. And it's also, yeah, not kind of taking in anything else. It's in a closed,
Exactly.
contained, safe space, which is really nice. In 6 months from now, what AI capability will change SEO significantly, in your opinion?
Wow. Jeez. I mean, I think a lot of this agentic stuff, I think we're probably going to be thinking a lot more about, how agents can navigate our websites. That's going to become a big frontier for SEOs. It already is, but, we're starting to think more about, yeah, agentic, I guess, behavior on our sites and experience on our sites. And then also, things like the UCP, for e-commerce companies and for companies that build apps with OpenAI and everything. Like, we need to make sure that they're there. We have a client I'm starting work with now where like they're gonna need to have an app on OpenAI, right? And in that category in order to be visible for the types of prompts that they care about. So I think,
Oh,
yeah, it's moving more towards like not just marketing to humans, but thinking about making our content accessible to bots and agents as much as necessary. Yeah.
the app, the fact that, yeah, these clients kind of need apps now, that's a whole different offering. How is your team sort of preparing for that?
I think right now we're just learning, learning the specs and the, documentation. We have a web dev team. So they've already helped a lot of our clients with things like merchant commerce feeds and things like that. But now there's a lot of new documentation for them to learn. So right now it's just a big learning opportunity.
It puts, yeah, puts your department in a certain position where it's also overseeing, app development, which is who would have thought
Yep,
in 2026.
for sure.
Second last question. If AI vanished tomorrow or turned too costly, which part of your workflow would break first?
Ooh, wow. I've thought about that a lot. I'm like, how do we go back from here? Like if we didn't have AI, I think it would slow us down quite a bit, right? To go back to doing things 100% manually. Also, I find that AI is really good for like, let's say you're writing something and you get really stuck on a sentence and you just don't know how to convey your thoughts and you can kind of like do a dump of all your ideas and then it gives you a perfect sentence, right? Like stuff like that. It's an assistant, and it's a catalyst. So I think for me, the biggest change would be, yeah, the ability to handle like large pieces of content or large data sets and to kind of like scale it down very quickly. And then also with my writing, to put my ideas into writing as efficiently as I can.
Last question. One word to describe the future of SEO.
Evolving,
Nice. You're the
always
second
evolving.
person to use that
Oh, really?
to use that term. Yeah. Do you know Dan Schur?
Yes, I know that.
So his company it's still called Evolving SEO. So it was the
Oh, perfect.
perfect
Perfect. I
word
just
for him,
shout out.
exactly. But yeah, thank you so much, Lily. This was great. Let the people know how they can keep in touch with you, where they can see you speak.
For
And
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I should probably publish my speaking dates for this year. I'm speaking literally around the world this year. It's going to be really fun. South America, China at one point, Germany, Croatia, London, a few others, Greece as well. So
Oh
around the world
wow.
this year. But you can Basically, I just say to Google my name and pick whatever platform you like to follow me on. I'm on all of them. I post on X pretty much daily and LinkedIn as well.
Thank you so much, Liddy.